and how are you today?
Well, good afternoon, Paul. I'm well, thank you so much.
Brilliant. Glad to see you. It's the first time we've ever met. And it feels like I've known you forever because we've just been talking offline for about 10 minutes and I know everything about you, but we may pick up on some of those points later on in the
Sure.
interview. So, for the benefit of our audience today, Wendy, I wonder if you can give us some background to your career and what you've been doing in the energy industry.
Sure. So I've been in the workplace about 20 years, following on from higher education. And I started off working with schools actually on reducing carbon emissions in the school run. So I started in transport and I then went over to energy about 17 years ago. And that was primarily, I was working for a very large consultancy, working on a very small project. So they looked after an energy education program they developed for a local authority, and we looked after sort of 20 to 30 schools. And how that came about was that there was lots of packs, leaflets, documents, online help for schools. But what they all said to us was, we just want someone to come in and help us and digest this information and show us and answer our questions. We don't have time to read the resource pack. So that's what it became. It became actually some expertise at site, talking to people, outlining activities that they would go away and do. But there would always be, if you like, a helping hand, a go-to person who'd have experience. And that project became, we rolled it out to 6 or 7 local authorities. We had lots of schools involved in the end, and it won an Ashton Award. One of our schools won an Ashton Award, and it won the National Energy Efficiency Award for training and behaviour change in behaviour change and training category. And it was dealing with non-technical end users really of energy and getting them to understand why it's important to save energy. But because it was working with schools, there's so many stakeholders involved, A, in the public sector and B, in schools. So the bursar wanted to save money, the eco teacher wanted to go for an energy award. I think the children wanted to bunk off class, so they all wanted to be in the energy club.
Yeah.
The caretaker wanted, desperate for help to get things sorted with the boiler. The head teacher might want a bit of kudos, so we'd always go through a water program, get recognition, have a bit of sort of competition going with local schools, and the local authority who would actually pay were all about reducing energy consumption for the estate, which at that time was £11 million, and is obviously, that was 17 years ago. It's a lot bigger now.
Yeah.
So that was my experience, and then I went actually through consultancy into doing more less work with schools and trying to get 5-year-olds to do energy audits, more to working obviously more mainstream public sector, commercial sector organisations. And it's one of those things that actually energy management, it's the same steps that you need to take. Obviously 50,001 sets those out, but it's the same steps you need to take. It's just perhaps to a greater or lesser degree, but to make those steps relevant to the organisation that you are in. So if you need to do an awareness campaign, that is going to look quite different in a school to how it might look in a multinational industrial organisation.
Yeah.
But you still need to have an awareness campaign. You still need to impart the right information to the right people at the right time in the right way, to affect the change that you want.
Yeah. But go back to the school. Was that the eco school uh, program they did with the bronze, silver, and gold? Is that what we're
So
talking about there?
no, what it was it was developed by Atkins, and it was the Atkins School Energy Education Program. And the first thing that I did was, when I took it on, was I aligned it to the Energy Saving Trust Certification for Schools scheme. So all the work that we did was aligned to another program that was independently checked and assessed. And it meant that as schools went through, not only were they great reducing their bills, but they were going to get a certificate at the end of it, because schools love certificates.
Yeah.
And what we would also then say is, are you becoming an eco school? Use this energy activity for your green flag. And then you'd have to do community days. So we got lots of MPs involved in coming to those community days. So it became very high profile. And obviously we had a school that came through the Ashton Award, and it was all about, is this replicable? Can this happen anywhere else? Has this school had lots and lots of extra special help and support? Or can any school pick this up, roll with it, and make reductions? So we had a website alongside it which showcased everything that we had done so that any other school could get involved if they wanted to without someone going in to support them. But it was not going in all the time. It was maybe going in once or twice a term for a year, but getting the school up and running with it. And energy management is one of those things, actually. It's good energy management is a symptom of good management per se. So schools that perhaps were maybe in special measures or had other issues going on were often the ones that maybe needed most help with energy. Whereas if you ask the schools to volunteer to be on the programme, chances were they're the schools that already had energy absolutely down to a T and they were on it. So you could be working in a situation where actually the local authority would obviously paying the bill for you to go in. We're encouraging you to work with schools where energy was, using the kilowatt hours per meter squared, energy was high. So could you go in and deal with that school? But there might be, lots of other reasons. But it was great. It was challenging, but the best ideas always came from the pupils. So you say, we're going to do an assembly. We're going to do an assembly about energy. Oh, don't want to do that. Oh, what do you want to do? We want to do an assembly about, we want to do a game show. We want to do Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Okay, so we would make Who Wants to Be a Millionaire energy style. We would do X Factor energy style. And, then you've got this great meeting of minds. So you've got the desires and the interest of the client, or in this case, the children. And we had we were very clear with what the outcome needed to be. So we had the steps we needed to take, and it was just bringing it together so everybody was happy. And where you have multiple stakeholders in an organisation, that I think is the key, to find the hook to hang the project, for that meets everybody's goals. And that can be incredibly difficult.
With the schools, do they have targets, and how do they achieve those targets?
Yeah, so what we would do in the early days, it was much harder when we didn't have good metering in place. So for example, secondary schools would always usually have half-hourly metering, so you had good interval data. For primary schools, they'd be that bit smaller, so it was manual meter reads, that kind of thing. It was that we'd get the kids doing every week, and so you'd have the curriculum linked lessons as well. They'd have a load of meter reads, then we'd have a math lesson and plot all the reads and show that. But when the carbon reduction commitment came out and you got the incentives to put in AMRs, and there was a massive AMR rollout across the public sector, that was such a game changer, because in the local authority I worked for, every single school had an AMR, obviously loggers on gas, and they could now see what was happening to school at 3 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday, or what the close down procedure was like at 6 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. And they then saw data about their own school that was showing their own behaviours, and that's where we made such savings. So we looked at data for gas, and we worked out that 20% of gas consumption across the school estate happened during school holidays. And it was simply things weren't the boiler was operating in hand, or it was operating as though the school's occupied, but actually they didn't have any lettings in. Settings weren't correct. There was all sorts of issues coming up. So that was the biggie, to be able to look at your own consumption, look at where you've had best practice in your consumption. So maybe looking at base loads, for example. Let's find your own lowest base load. Let's see if we can recreate that, because a lot of, or what target should be working to, what should we be using? And no two schools are the same in the whole country. No two schools are operated the same way, and no two clients are the same. They work in similar industries, they might have other things that are similar, but they're not the same. So with the data, so go in and find your own best practice, and let's recreate that. If you've done it on one day or overnight on one night, obviously inadvertently, can we recreate that and do it every single night? So some of the work that I've done with EnCO and for recently is we make a target based on what we've already achieved unwittingly, to try and do that every single day.
And then you mentioned in the beginning that it wasn't a technical approach. It's all about the people and the stakeholders, not the technical element of it. How do you avoid not getting sucked in? For me, as we said offline, I'm
Yeah.
BMS, so I want to get into the BMS. I want to make that the changes and spend time there. Jez wants to get in front of the boiler,
Yeah.
and I'm sure John Mulholland would want to do something else, and James Britton
Yeah.
would want to do his own
Yeah.
thing. How do we all stand back? Which is basically you're standing back because you've got that experience to stand back
Yeah.
and just look at the people. How do we do that as experts?
So you said not getting too involved in the technical side, and it's working out, I found, who is actually responsible for and who can influence energy in the setting. And if we just take schools as an example, in terms of the gas consumption, invariably it's in the hands of a few, which might be the site manager and someone who can operate in the facilities team who might have access to the BMS. But there's also the leaving of the doors open, the leaving of the windows open, the people who found the override switch, who were renting the hall on a Sunday morning and thought, oh, it's a bit nippy, press override, went away, left it. So it's trying to tackling that. It's quite easy with gas. As I said, there's fewer people involved. With electricity, there's so many people who can influence it in school. Ultimately, though, again, it is probably down to a few who influence the majority of it. So it's taking a step back and saying, where are we going to direct activity based on where we're going to get the biggest bang for our buck, as it were. So the thing I always do to start with is I look at the overnight baseload. I look at that out of hours consumption, because there's one person in the day whose job it is to finally turn the key as they walk away, and a team that they would have had that have closed down the building. So we work with that team, and what we've found over time actually is, if you get the baseload down, and you can see this in the data, and I like getting people enthused about looking at data, because you want to know if you're making an effort that you're having an impact. And so often people, oh, we had a great campaign, but it all sort of fell apart. We don't really know what we saved. So I love showing people the data, say, right, this is where we got to. And this is when you then look at that base load, maybe over, say, a half term, we see that it starts to creep up, because you know that staff have come in, need to start getting ready for the term ahead, maybe left a few bits on, and the cumulative effect of that is, oh, we're now back up to here. So that interaction between people's behaviour, people's activity, people's choices, and how it plays through and demonstrates in the data, I find so fascinating, and I like to share that with our clients and get them to see that for themselves. They know their building better than I know their building. They know the way they operate their building better than I do. And I like to get them infused about how they can see that come out in the data.
And you're talking clients now, not the school.
Yeah.
What's the difference between working with the school and working with a business? Do you think the business is just the same thing? It's just you're dealing with different end user as such?
On the whole, if it's a industrial commercial customer, that can be different. There's big significant energy using equipment. If you're dealing with, my favorite type of customer is multi-site, lots of multiple sites, maybe smaller sites, non-technical end users. So something like a retail chain,
A leisure centre or something like that.
yeah, or schools, or so in lots of offices. They're my favorite type of customer, because you can then start actually having a little bit of competition and things going. But it's showing there is very little difference between a school and, say, dealing with a retail customer. Dealing with a primary school is different to dealing with a secondary school. So the secondary school, you've still got a bit of an ops team in, and you've still got a facilities team in. That doesn't happen in a primary school. And with a primary school, you have that wonderful enthusiasm of 300 pupils, stakeholders, who are very keen to do something. But I find that's the way the workplace is going now. So many, when you go to visit a client organisation, there's already been some on the ground work, often a bit scattergun and sporadic, but there's this real desire to do something to cut energy consumption, whether it be for cost, but invariably it's actually for the carbon aspect of it. We want to do something, we want to save carbon, we want to do something in our area that we can see, and it's trying to keep that going, encourage that, but actually pull it into a higher strategic piece with some clear piece of an energy review to start with, and some clear objectives and targets, and then how that translates into people's individual workspace. So it's harnessing enthusiasm from those non-technical stakeholders. But there, as I said, there are always people who are responsible for majority of the energy consumption and can make those decisions, and they're the key ones to get into. And sometimes we can be called up by finance because actually it's a cost issue, and sometimes you're phoned up by operation or facilities management because it's an issue they've got a problem with. And the best projects are where you have both of those roles in on the project, because it is a cost and it is consumption. So it is both, and you want to reduce both for a client. And now, of course, we have the element of carbon.
And do you find some of these opportunities, the best, I like the word you use, best, I always call it best practice. So do you find these best practice are more or less zero cost because it doesn't cost anything to go and put the timer right, for instance? And if you then multiply that across the group, it's a massive savings, isn't it?
Yeah, so just talking about that local authority, 20% of gas using the Christmas holidays, October half term, or February half term, needlessly. That was simply a case of highlighting it to the right team and getting things reset. And actually, then when you talk to people as well, so that's where you can find some issues. So you love BMSs. We had a BMS. It was saying it's saying the boiler was off, and I'm looking at the data and I'm saying, well, I can see gas coming through the system, so somewhere we have a problem. And it was like, no, the BMS is saying it's off, and the gas is going through the system. And actually, I've got a brilliant picture in one of our EnCO case studies, where actually the boiler had never been connected to the BMS outstation, so all the wires were just there. And this is why this has happened. So you can then find some of the technological problems, or there's a frostat that's not working, or something's happened. Somebody press override and you hadn't realised. So you can find these sorts of problems. I'm sorry, I've got.
Sorry. I had to persuade a client once to do a night audit.
Yeah.
He was adamant that the BMS was telling him that everything was going off. And I said,
Yeah.
I'm looking at the day plus one was looking at the data in the morning.
Yeah.
And it was clearly showing that nothing was going off.
Yeah.
So he said, look, I'm doing some night work. I'm going to come in and have a look at it. He actually found the BMS was shutting everything down, but the contactors on the control panel was all jammed.
Yeah.
So they're never coming off.
Yeah.
And then we looked back in the data to see when and it happened like 10 months ago.
Yeah.
It'd been like that.
This is when you have that data and you realize it's happened for years, and the cost saving that could have happened for something quite simple. And having the data is great. So when you talk about, what can people do, sometimes actually there is a payment, there is a cost involved in fixing, but it can be quite a small cost. And when you have to say, well, this is what it's costing us currently because it's never going off, and we need someone to come out and just double check this, and it's going to cost £300, but actually the payback is 4 weeks. It just makes everything so much easier. But that low-hanging fruit that you asked me about, to sort of start with the easy wins, switching off overnight is really usually down to such a small team of people that there is no cost. There is no cost in that, really. It's just switching off overnight. And Cheney School, who I've done a case study on, they're an accredited EnCO organisation, first school through. We looked at the half-hourly data from the main incomer, and we managed to get reduction down on that. And what we did with that is we reinvested that money in sub-metering. And there were 8 blocks, all in their own academic departments, each had a sub-meter. The information we got from that pushed the savings down so much more. It was that project paid for itself. Those sub-meters paid for themselves in a couple of months for the more information that they were able to give. So actually, really good metering. And at fiscal level, that doesn't have to be expensive. Obviously, subs is a bit more pricey, but really good metering and information, I think, is the the only thing you need to pay out for, if you need to pay out for only one thing in the first instance, because that will give you the information you need, and you share it with site and they're like, that's not right, that is right, that's unexpected, don't know what's going on there. And then it's information, isn't it? You're in the first instance paying for information, and actions often don't cost much. And if you need projects that do cost, you can properly price those up because you have all the information that you
Definitely.
need.
You have the full story there, don't you?
Yeah.
Do you
And it
think
always amazes me how many organizations do not have good data, or have no idea that they have data, or that they can access it, on day plus one. So they've got a half-hourly supply, they just see the data when it comes in on their bill, and then they request it after that. I'm like, well, you've now got your data 6 weeks after the day it happened, potentially. So 6 weeks have occurred since the problem. So yeah.
And the problem is getting half-hourly data isn't part of the story, is it? Because half-hourly data is just a CSV file with loads of figures. We need to have a process to convert that into a nice graph to tell us. Like I've met organizations that go, oh, we take a meter reading every day. Great. What did you do with it? Oh, we write it in a pad. Brilliant. What do you do with it then? We leave it in the pad. Okay.
Yeah.
Ideally, you need to be putting that into graphical
Yeah.
format so you can see what's happening with your energy. That's the education. When look, we're sitting in our nice cozy rooms now, and we're the experts, we know exactly what needs to be done. How do we, as experts, get organization? Because there's hundreds and hundreds of organizations that need this type of work as such. How do we fix that gap? Because it's massive. There's not enough experts out there. We've got this program going regarding EnCO, which is growing and developing. We will never get to where we need to be to go and deliver all these programs, they're no-brainer programs to work with organizations. What do you think we need to do to get this all balanced?
I said the biggest game changer for me in my career was when I said that carbon reduction commitment announcement was that you were originally going to get a discount on the CRC if you had advanced metering throughout the estate, which then obviously it quickly changed into a tax. But that investment piece then happened, and since that went, so many sites have not kept up with that advanced metering, and they've gone back to, oh, actually the logger dropped off and we don't know, and we just take meter reads, or we might have a smart meter in, but actually that's not giving us data on demand, and it's not giving us half hourly. It's sending, great, our bills are accurate because the reading's gone off. So one thing that we've done in recent years, actually, here at JRP, is we've done some training with trade associations, so that, because often as well, if you're a small organization, it's really hard to, you can't pay for help. So it's actually giving some of our industry knowledge. Your data is available, this is where you can go and get it, this is what we mean by meter agents. You can select your own, you can select one that does show it to you in nice graphs rather than here's a CSV file, get on with it. And actually there's different prices as well for exactly the same service. You might be able to save a bit of money too. But to try and disseminate some of this information out to people whose job it is to record and pay for energy consumption, but they are not experts, and they maybe don't have the finances, resources as an organization to bring in experts. So to try and give out further information in a way that you can access. So we've done it through trade associations, where the trade association has paid us, then all members can listen to these webinars that we do, this training that we do, and try and impart little bits of information to make it easier. But as I said, that my passion is the non-technical audience, and to try and get people enthused and excited about energy consumption. And you talked about eco schools. Energy was the least selected project to do as a special project at Green Flag. I was like, oh, how can you make energy exciting? And I'm like, oh, there are so many ways to make energy exciting. Exactly. So everyone wanted to pick waste and do junk modeling, but we did all sorts of things. We really galvanized the kids' interest and activity into doing exciting things with energy. and get them thinking. And a lot of it translated into home, that I maybe do big community event and these parents will come up to me, oh God, you're the person. We're all having to turn lights off at home. You know, he's out there looking at the meter. This is happening, that's happened. So it's great, you know, and it's great. And actually that imparting information to a generation of students now is really important for the generation of employees and colleagues coming, you know, coming down the line.
My son, I got engaged with the EnCO schools. I took the school from when, because my sons were at the school. He's in his last year in the primary school and junior school, and then I took them from bronze to silver, and he was given an award for he become an eco warrior because he actually he's found loads of technologies and projects that I use today. I was looking at one only yesterday. That he went off and researched himself on the internet and found, and I had him in my house and we put him in the school. It was brilliant, and the enthusiasm they had. And I done the energy audit for them, and then I done a presentation and I got them all to do the audit from the pictures. It was great fun from all, you know, obviously the younger ones, they wasn't really concentrating that much and they wanted to play or whatever, and but the older ones were really into it. I found it very refreshing and very rewarding, and that brings me on to my next question. What makes you tick with all of this? What is your purpose? Have you got a purpose behind all of this?
So if I can impart my enthusiasm and any knowledge about energy consumption and reduction and energy management, you know, you can't manage what you're not measuring. So obviously the measurement is a huge piece for me, as my colleagues call me the data diva, so they will absolutely confirm that. If I can impart that to people, then that is a job well done for me. And as I said, we trained teachers, we trained parents, governors, we trained the fire service, we trained the librarians into actually, this is your data, this is your energy consumption, this is what it looks like, these are the patterns, do you know why? And you know, at the end of it, we had 100% positive feedback, and we had people like, I'm going to do something about this. And you know, actually, when I would go into those schools a year later, 2 years later, 3 years later, yes, you get obviously a bit of a skills fade and a turnover of staff. But when you sometimes meet these people 5, 6, 7 years later, you're the energy lady, and I'm still looking at my graphs. That is a job well done.
Amazing. You mentioned a magic word there, the energy lady. There's not enough females in this industry, is there? Do you agree with me, or do you think that's changing?
Absolutely, it's changing, thank goodness, and some you know, very bright energy engineers, female energy engineers coming through. So what I tended to find back in the day was that the energy engineers and energy managers, they come through an engineering route. So energy managers come through an engineering route, which tended to be male dominated at that time. Not so much now, and that sustainability managers tended to come through an environmental route, and carbon managers, which tended to be female dominated. I found now it's just a total mix, which is fantastic. And actually, you'd have the energy team would sit in one place, and the environmental team might sit somewhere else. But now it's all coming together under the umbrella of carbon. And I didn't come up through the typical energy engineering route, and actually energy engineers communicate in a certain way, and sustainability professionals sometimes communicate in a different way. So I talked to you earlier that I have a wonderful colleague, and their skill set is completely different to mine, and they would always much rather talk to a boiler if they possibly could and avoid talking to people. And
you won't mention no names. No,
you won't mention any names. So whereas I would always much rather talk to people, preferably, than talk to the boiler.
And
so,
I really wished I'd interviewed you first, because then I might have brought that into my conversation. But
well, I talk about one of my colleagues, and there are a number of my colleagues fit into that category.
And it's like me. It's like me. I'd rather speak to the BMS than the client. You know, sometimes, because I know what I'm looking at, and I really, you know, I'm going to be biased. I see a trend BMS because I used to work for Trend. As soon as I see them orange letters, that's it. I'm there.
Yeah.
Because it's like riding a bike as well. You know, you
Mm.
you can ride the bike. You can get into the trend system and know exactly, because it's been built on convention, and that's what I like about. And that's what I like about my approach to energy management. It's a convention because you've mentioned it quite a few times. Data is king. We can't manage what we don't measure. It's critical. Once we get that data, we can then start to make it sing and dance to make those savings. So
And
how long?
I think you asked about target. Also, I was going to say you asked
Go
about
on.
target setting and things earlier. We did a piece of feedback. We did a survey actually on a schools estate. That was 330 schools, and we said, do you have a data? Do you have a target? Do you have a target for reduction? Do you have a policy? Do you have a procedure? Do you have a plan? Lots of people had targets. No one had a plan. No one had done any procedures. I think how this coming up with an arbitrary target, we're going to save 10%. Well, is that what you think you can save? Have you done any analysis? Can you measure it? Have you got before and after? Etc., etc. So data is crucial for any meaningful targets. And this current moment in time, there's such a focus actually on being credible, and data is the only way to prove that you're credible, I find.
So, EnCO, what is your involvement with the team? Sorry, I've started coughing. I was choked on my coffee. Sorry.
So,
by the way, if we make any mistakes, we can just cut this bit. Okay, so so let's ask that question again. So, with EnCO, what's your role within this team currently?
Yeah, so I'm an EnCO accredited professional. I think one of the fifth one through or fourth one through. Only female one, I think, currently. So
really, you're the only
globally,
female.
it's quite exciting. I think I'm the only female EnCO accredited practitioner actually at the moment. And John, obviously I've worked with John Mulholland and Jez. They were very aware of all the work that I'd done, and I brought something different to the piece. I haven't worked with big industrial commercial clients on the whole. I've worked with, public sector customers or the non-intensive energy using private sector customers. So, and I've dealt with schools. So I came to the piece with something a little bit different. So I talk about my role is sometimes I go to the EnCO Academy and I do case studies and we do examples. And one of my customers, a school in Oxford, Cheney School, they have become an EnCO organisation now. So they're an accredited EnCO organisation, and their case study is actually on the web. So I'm involved in putting together case studies and things for EnCO as well. And just to disseminate my experience and my knowledge to others coming through the programme.
You think we're ever going to see you doing some training alongside John and Jess?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do training all the time anyway as part of my day job. So I'm doing some training next week actually for young people, young persons organisation on starting actually with a bigger piece about climate change, because that's important and that's what's driving, but actually the practical steps and what you can do to reduce energy consumption within your remit, both within the clubs that these young people attend or in the home setting as well. So I do love training, but I'd like to do some training through an EnCO as well, and particularly around.
I attend those academies and I think they're very valuable. We get like refreshers on what's happening within the group. We also break off into different groups and just share ideas of our challenges and what's happening, which I find that, I quite like sharing my knowledge with other people and hearing what their challenges are. And that's the reason why I do this podcast, to share the knowledge around the world regarding energy experts. So,
and there's always an opportunity for some, we are, and I said to you before, we're not all experts in all of the areas of energy management. I'm not an expert in BMS, and there is an opportunity for, I think, for some really specific top-up training for people who may have been an energy manager for 10 years. Like, actually, I always get external support to do the BMS, or I get external support to do the metering strategy, or I get external support to do the behaviour change piece, or whatever it may be. So I think there's a role for, and obviously an EnCO is about helping all of us upskill in that behaviour change piece, but there might be a role actually to upskill in some of the other areas.
There's also procurement, isn't there? Procuring your energy, because there's no point making all these savings if you're not buying correctly, and there's no point buying correctly if you're not going to make the savings. So I've met organisations that have done either or, and the two really do come together. It's really important to align both those areas.
Yeah, because your bills are going to go down by paying less, and your bills are going to go down by using less, and ideally your bills are doubly going to go down by both. So.
Exactly. So Wendy, this is the time in the in the podcast where you've been listening to all my previous episodes, haven't you? No.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yes, we know that.
Illness in his poem.
So it's come to this time where I'd like to ask yourself if there's something you can give back to our industry today. You've given a lot of content back today, but is there anything specific that you could like to give back as a takeaway?
Sure. I think there's two things. One is that I think someone used to say to me, be clear as to outcome and flexible as to means. And I've spoken about those steps before, that actually it's the same steps we do. It's the energy management system steps that we're all aware of and are set out in 50,001, but it's doing them to a greater or lesser degree, or adapting them so they're relevant for the setting. So I had to do energy. For part of the Eco Schools Award, we had to demonstrate energy audits, and we did those anyway. So I said, let's do energy audits. That was great until I worked with an infant school where the children were 4 to 7. Some of the children can't read. So actually what we did was we got maps of the school, we divided into 4, we had 4 maps, and we had sticky dots, and blue was taps, yellow was lights, and green was small power, and red was sort of heating. And they didn't want to put sticky dots on and put the numbers on, and it was great. And then we went on to use lots of photographs to demonstrate things, and actually there's no reason why that approach of not being over technical can't be replicated to other people. We still did what we needed to do, but we made it absolutely relevant to the people who are going to be doing the task. So I think always we've got a very clear outcome, but really flexible. And if you can make it as I don't want to say bespoke, so that sounds like it has to be something extra special, but if you can integrate it as much as possible and make it as relevant as possible to the people you're working with, it becomes very easy for them to adapt and just take on board. It's not a problem. It's like a new skill they've got to learn. Like, oh yeah, we can just do this. So that was the first takeaway. And the second takeaway is a proverb that I learned fairly recently, which is, if you think you're too small to make a difference, you've never been in a tent with a mosquito. So that's one thing that I would say to people.
Where does that come from? Maybe.
I think it's an old proverb, as I understand it. Yeah.
Brilliant. No, I really like that. And I'm sure that will be clipped later. Because you've got your lipstick and your mascara on. Don't worry, I'll cut that bit out.
Does that answer your questions?
Wendy, that was absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. I'd like to say, look, thank you for coming along and sharing your knowledge with us today. It's been very insightful, and I hope that someone will just take one little thing away from today and go and make a difference from your words. So thank you very much, Wendy, for coming along. Right. And I'd like to say, lastly, please, Wendy, you and your family stay safe in these times.
Thank you so much. And you, Paul, thank you.